Hi, welcome to the Air Manager API tutorial video series. In this video we're going to be talking about timers. So here we are on the API page of the wiki, and the functions that we're going to be talking about in this video, as I said, are timers. Three functions, fairly simple but very powerful, and you can use them in lots of different ways. So you'll see when we jump into the code window, I've got a few examples there to show you about how to use these three timer functions here. So the three functions are timer start. Again, you give it an ID, very similar to lots of the other functions that we've covered already. There's a delay, so you can start the when you want the timer to start. You can set that to zeros if you want it to start immediately or some time after that. A period of how often you want the timer to continually rerun and call the callback again, so you can make that a duration and it will keep calling that callback every time that period elapses. Or you can set it to 0 or nil, so that you only literally call the callback once, i.e. once this initial delay period is met. So you can use it in lots of different ways. That's how you start a timer. Next one's fairly self-explanatory. It's just to stop a timer. So if you had a timer that was continually running and you wanted to stop it for any reason, you just call timer stop and the timer ID that you created up here, and that stops the timer. And then this last function is a way of checking whether or not an existing timer is running or not. And again, you use the timer ID as the reference, and you basically ask, or in this case it's using it's storing the result of if the timer is running that timer ID. It stores the result in this running, and that's a Boolean result, so you either get a true or a false depending on if the timer is actually running or not. But you can use that in lots of ways, and I've got a couple of examples of this and using it in an if statement of how that works. So let's dive straight into the code window. You can see here, although there was only three functions there, I've got quite a bit of code here, but we're going to just step through these one by one. I've got a lot of them commented out, so they're not actually doing a lot at the moment. So the one we're going to focus on first of all is just using the very basics of a timer here. So that's this line here. So what this is going to do is it's going to create a timer ID. So we've just called it timer underscore ID for want of a better ID name. And we're going to start a timer. We're going to start immediately, i.e. at 0. And whoops. And then we're going to every 1000 milliseconds, so every 1 second, we're going to call the timer callback. Okay, so that timer callback is the name of a function. Now, because we've called it here, obviously it has to pre-exist, similar to what we've said in some of the other videos. So the timer callback function is up here. So at the moment, I've got a lot of this. In fact, we could probably comment this out as well, just so you're not getting confused in terms of what code is actually running here. So the only actual command that we're actually interested in within this function here is this print statement. So it's going to print to the console. As you can see here, I've had it previously running this 1 second repeating timer, which is what the text we've got here. So every when this timer runs, every 1 second, you should see it print 1 second repeating timer in the console window here, just for the purposes of showing how this this timer loops round. So let's just go ahead and do that. There we have it. So 1 second, every 1 second it prints that statement in there, and you get a new one. It's actually adding them on the top there, so that's shifting down, so the newest one is at the top there. So let's stop that. So that's just a very basic form of showing the command, the statement in its full there, and then using a callback to actually a pre-existing function that already exists. We're going to call that function, which is just above it, and we're just going to do the print. Now we're going to do exactly the same thing now. We're going to comment that out now. That time we're going to do exactly the same in terms of functionality, but we're just going to do it all in the one statement, if you like, and that's because we're not going to pre-exist the function ahead of the thing. There's another way of doing this with a lot of the callbacks, not just for the timers, but if you see with you know, a lot of the functions that have callback on the end, you can structure the command like this, or the function, sorry. You can structure it like this, so you can basically say that well, I only want a fairly basic function, or you can carry on essentially the function detail needs to be between this function and end, just as it does in a normal function, but you're writing it in line here, okay, with the timer start function. So we're creating another timer ID. This time we're going to call it timer2 ID. We're going to start do timer start exactly the same as what we did before. We're going to say that we're not going to have no initial delay, so we're going to start immediately, i.e. at 0. And this time we're going to say every 2 seconds we want to run this callback. Well, it hasn't got a callback in here, so we just literally write the function in directly. So you can just write the word function. You create the open and close brackets as you do here for a normal function, but you don't need to give it a name, because obviously it's implicitly implied to the fact that it's in line with the function, the timer start function here. And then at the very end you just put the end. Now the curly sorry, not the curly brackets, but the bracket there at the end just denotes the end of that bracket that is open there at the time the start of the timer start function. So let's go ahead and uncomment this print statement, and then this print statement just says 2-second repeating timer, just so you can see the difference. But it does exactly the same as this, but you can see how it's just structured slightly different using that function. Let's save that and then run. So 2-second repeating timer, so you can see it's a little bit slower than before. 2-second repeating timer, every 2 seconds it's repeating. Fairly straightforward so far. Let's uncomment that one. Let's move on to the next one. So the next one you can see is structured slightly different. Again, we've got another ID now, timer 3. This time we've said we want to wait 1000 milliseconds before starting the timer, so that delay argument, and we don't want to repeat. We've set it to nil. You could set that to 0 if you want, but you can also use nil in there. This second argument here, you can put nil in there. So in this example, it will wait 1 second, and then it will run the function, but it won't repeat, because obviously we've said well, there is no repeat. We don't want to run it again in so many milliseconds. We just said nil. So again, we've got the same structure here with the function, and so therefore we're just going to do this print, and this time it says 1-shot timer. So after 1 second we should see 1-shot timer appear in the console here. So let's go ahead and save that instrument, run. There you go, 1-shot timer. And we don't get any more, of course, because it is literally that. It's a 1-shot timer. After 1 second it fires, and then that's the end of it. So I can just show you that in a little bit more. If we change that to say 5 seconds, and we run again, you can see after I press run, we wait about 5 seconds, and then 1-shot timer comes up. So you can make that obviously number as whatever you want, but you can, you know, use it to delay something or not do a particular action until after a certain number of milliseconds, etc. So that's the using it in like the 1-shot mode. And then here we have a in this timer 4 ID example, we have a mixture of the two now. So in these previous examples we didn't have any delay, and we had a repeating period, and the same in the 2-second repeating timer. And then we had a delay but no repeat, and now in this example we've got a delay and a repeat. Okay, so we're saying we're going to wait 7 seconds, and then after that 7 seconds is up, where we'd like to repeat every 500 milliseconds, please. So let's go ahead and see the effect of that. So nothing initially, you wait for the 7 seconds, and then once the 7 seconds is up, we should see, there you go, about every half a second there we're getting a delayed start repeating timer, which is the print statement that we have here. So again, although I've only got print statements in here, you can see that you could have other elements of your code in here to show images or to do different functions, or to start your own timers off to count an event before you do something else later on within these callback functions. I'm just using print in here just to sort of demonstrate to you how the timer loops sort of iterate round with these periods. So that's the fourth example. So now what I'm going to show you now is I'm going to show you the stop function, which is fairly straightforward, and then we're going to look at the timer running example, and then I've got one more thing to show you at the very end as a sort of more of a practical demonstration of how you can use the timer function. Okay, so what we've got here then is I'm going to which one have we got here? So we've got timer ID, so that's this one here. Right. So now we've uncommented timer ID again. So let's just make sure that that's, yeah, okay. So our 1 second repeating timer is working okay there. So you probably saw every time I press play there, you see the instrument opens there, and you see the red button on there. That's because this little bit of code here, which is going to come in useful for this little demonstration, is I've got a button head in there which we've talked about in previous videos, and I'm just adding the same image twice for the pressed and the released state. And as part of that button add, the callback for the press of that button is the timer stop command. So essentially we're going to say timer stop timer ID, which is the timer ID that we're running up here, and then we're just for the purposes of showing as we press that button, we're going to print the statement timer stopped. So this one you can see is ticking away, and it will continually to tick away once every second forever and ever until we stop it. So we can either stop that in code by using some event. I've just happened to have set this button up to do that, and you can see it then pops up with the print statement timer stopped, and you can see it's not printing anymore 1 second repeating timers after that timer stopped. Yeah, so the newest one on the top, as I said before, you can see 1 second repeating timer, it counted up. Let's run that again. You just see that very quickly. I'll stop it a bit quicker this time. Stop. There you go. So that's the timer stop. So when I use that function timer stop timer ID, it actually stops the timer from running altogether. So this won't loop again. And if you wanted to start it again, you'd have to start a fresh timer to start that all over again. Okay, so now let's stop that. That's the timer stop. We'll have a quick look at the timer running now. So I'll uncomment these couple of statements that we've got here. The first one, well, let's talk about the actual function first. So the timer running function lets you establish whether or not a particular timer is running. So here I'm saying timer running timer 3 ID. So timer 3 is why have I got timer 3 in there? We don't really oh yeah, no, timer 3, that's good. Let's change that back to 1 second though, and then what we can do is we don't need the print statement for this particular purposes. So timer 3 is the one that we're interested in monitoring here, and we're saying if timer 3 is running, well, not if it's running, but just give me the status of timer 3 and store it in the variable running, and then just below that I'm going to say print running. I could just say print timer running, timer 3 ID if I wanted to in there, it's the same thing. And then in this line here, I'm saying if timer running, timer 3. So now I'm saying because the timer running, timer 3 ID will be a true or a false, so I'm saying if, in this case, saying if it's true, then print if statement is true. So I'm just showing another way of using timer running there. There it's just storing it in the video and in a variable and then printing that variable. Here we're actually using the status in an if statement to say, well, if it is running, then print if statement true. So you can use if statements in there to decide if the timer's running to do a particular event or do something else, show something or don't show something, or play a sound, don't play a sound, or whatever you need it to do in terms of the instrument or the operation of the instrument. So what have we got? Timer 3. Okay, so you can see here I've wrapped this timer running question or when it stores the information here, I've wrapped it in a timer, and the reason I've done that is because this is a 1 second delayed timer. For the purposes of showing you how these work, these 1 second, these ones that are non-recurring in terms of it's got a nil in here, they stop themselves, so you don't have to stop them because obviously there is no repeating. The only ones you have to stop are the ones that are continually running here because this one repeats every 2 seconds, that one repeats every 1 second. But this one doesn't repeat, but it will still report that it's running if it's during that 1 second period. So that's why I've wrapped this in a timer, is to show you that how this reports. So I'm saying that after 900 milliseconds, which is before the timer's finished running, I want you to run I want you to check on the status and report back via these prints, and then after that we'll change that time and we'll make it slightly after the timer duration has elapsed, and it should report something different. So because it's a second, I've said 900 milliseconds, so I'm actually asking it for its status before it's finished running, so it should report that it's running, so it should be true. So but we should see a print true, and if this is true, which it should be, please print the if statement true. So we should see a true and a if statement true if everything works okay. So let's see how we get on with that. There we go. So after 900 milliseconds it went and looked to see if timer 3 was running, and it determined that after 900 milliseconds running was in fact true, and therefore this statement was true, and it printed the if statement is true. Now if we change that to say 1.1 seconds, we should see that it reports false, and it does. And it doesn't print anything on this line because this needs to be true for it to print. So because it's not true and it's still false, it doesn't print the if statement true. So there you can see you can use the timer running to establish the status of a timer. Obviously, if you were using one of these recurring timers and you used the is running and it was still running and you hadn't used the stop command, then it would report true all the time until you obviously use the stop. But if some other element of the code may issue a stop command and you don't know the status of the particular timer at that time, you can use this running timer running function to establish whether or not the timer's running or not. Okay, so the last little thing I want to just show you then is I want to show you a practical or semi-practical, should I say, way of, let's comment all these out. Okay, so what we have here now, and we don't need that either. Okay, so essentially what we've got here now is we've just uncommented timer ID. So we've got our normal 1 second recurring timer which we started off with in the first place, and then it's going to go to this timer callback. But now in the timer callback I've uncommented a couple more of the lines here. One of them is rotate, and this is just a variable that I've called rot equals rot plus 10. So essentially what that does is initially we set that variable to 0 here, and then it just keeps adding 10 every time, every second it'll add 10 to that variable, and it uses that variable to rotate the image ID, which I've also uncommented, which is just the image of our switch again. So if we run that now, you can see, there you go, there's the 1 second repeating timer, and every time that ticks, you can see now our image of our switch is rotating 10 degrees every 1 second. So we can, if we want to, we could make that only 1 degree, so a very small amount, but we could make it a lot quicker time, say every 10 milliseconds. You can see loads of them because it's happening every 10 milliseconds, and it gives the effect of a sort of a smooth running switch because it's happening much faster. So that's something you could use the timer function for, to perform some kind of an animation on something. Or another use for it, we'll comment out the rotate very quickly here, is to provide like a flashing type. So let's go back to 1 second there. So what we're doing here is we've now commented out the rotate functions, and we've uncommented the visible function. So we're going to take that same image ID of our switch, and we're going to use the variable show, and then down here we just say show equals not show. So we basically just invert it every time we count this second. So that will basically just make that show variable true, false every 1 second, and so it should flash our the image of our switch on and off as this toggles there. There we go. So you could see if this was an image of a warning light or an annunciator or something, you could flash that on and off as a way of probably need that to be a little bit shorter than that, maybe half a second. Might give a better effect. Yeah, well, it depends on what the warning is, I suppose. But again, you can use the you could use the timer for performing, flashing an image on and off to give you like a warning light type function. So you can see that for timers, you can use them for lots of different things. I've probably not shown you everything there that you could use a timer for, but there's lots of different uses in terms of wanting to create delays in your code, or wanting to wait for the status of something to happen, or wanting to count something, or repeat something on a continual basis, that you can use the timer functions for. So I think pretty much we've covered all of the parts of the timer functions. So that concludes this video. Please join me again for another video very soon. Thanks. Bye.